Neel Ernest Kearby was born on June 5, 1911, in the dusty energy of Wichita Falls, Texas, a city that smelled of oil derricks and big dreams. His father worked long hours in the petroleum fields, and his mother, a former schoolteacher, read him stories about adventurers who conquered the skies. Those tales settled into the marrow of the quiet, lanky boy, and he spent afternoons building model airplanes from balsa wood and bits of string. When barnstorming pilots occasionally buzzed the county fair, young Neel would race to the makeshift airstrip, elbows perched on the rope line, letting the prop wash ripple across his face while he memorized the growl of radial engines. He was a diligent student, more deliberate than dazzling, but determination propelled him to the University of Texas in Austin. There, between economics classes and ROTC drills, flight remained a North Star yearning. In February 1937, months before graduation, he secured a coveted spot in the U.S. Army Air Corps Flying Cadet Program at Randolph Field. His parents accompanied him to the train depot. His mother pressed a handwritten psalm into his palm, and his father's handshake carried every unspoken hope a parent can muster. Cadet life in the pre-war Air Corps was equal parts discipline and exhilaration. Morning reveille shattered the Texas dawn, and Neel's days filled with formation runs, navigation theory, and endless pattern work in the stub-nosed PT-3 trainers that shivered in crosswinds. He was methodical, cataloguing every cockpit lesson. In a notebook he kept underneath his pillow, instructors soon noted how he coaxed smooth performance from unforgiving aircraft without showboating. By March 1938, he earned his wings and a second lieutenant's bar, followed by assignments that shuttled him from Barksdale Field in Louisiana to Wright Field in Ohio. He first flew the bulbous P-36 Hawk, then transitioned to the sleeker P-39 Airacobra, but promotion came faster than new airplanes. When war burst across Europe, he was already a captain, responsible for training younger pilots who arrived wide-eyed and impatient. Pearl Harbor finally yanked America into global conflict, and the Army Air Forces scrambled to build fighter groups for sprawling theaters. In early 1943, Neel accepted command of the freshly activated 348th Fighter Group, destined for the furnace of the Southwest Pacific. The transfer delivered him to Port Moresby, New Guinea, a land of equatorial storms, jungle malaria, and an enemy dug into mountainside hideouts. His outfit, composed largely of pilots who had never seen combat, was issued the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, an aircraft some derided as a heavyweight ill-suited to the nimble dogfights against Japan's Ki-43 Oscar and A6M0. With a 2,000 horsepower, Pratt & Whitney engine and 850 caliber machine guns, the P-47 excelled above 20,000 feet in Europe. New Guinea's scrap-and-run skirmishes happened far lower. Neel refused to accept the conventional wisdom that his group would be disadvantaged. In tent-side evening huddles, he dissected flight, test data, then took his own P-47, soon christened Fiery Ginger Fur after his red-haired wife Virginia, into the cloud-stacked canyons to experiment with new tactics. He discovered that a shallow, high-speed dive at treetop level could negate the enemy's tighter turning radius, and that the Jug's rugged airframe could outdive anything in the skies. He drilled his pilots relentlessly, emphasizing teamwork, radio discipline, and quick-slash attacks rather than swirling turn fights. Combat arrived on June 16, 1943, when a mixed formation of Oscars and bombers appeared near Leh. Kearby led his men from 15,000 feet, rolled into a screaming pass, and lit up a Ki-43 before its pilot knew he'd been spotted. The P-47's guns, synced by hours of careful calibration, stitched wings and fuselage with tracer fire. The Japanese fighter burst into flame. Neel pulled up, leveled, and watched it smear the jungle canopy. 2 more enemy aircraft fell under. His wing-mounted guns that day, giving him his first triple victory. Back at base, he said little except to jot times, altitudes, and ammunition expended in his logbook. The ground crewman, sweaty and shirtless, patted the scarred aluminum flank of Fiery Ginger 4 with newfound reverence. Word spread quickly through Dobadura's tent city. Perhaps the Thunderbolt could thrive in the Pacific after all. Summer melted into autumn. The 348th escorted B-25s on shipping sweeps, covered supply drops over ravines, and tangled daily with interception flights from Rabaul. The rain-soaked metal PSP runway clanged under every landing, while mosquitoes harassed pilots during debriefing, but Kearby maintained a calm center. He wrote letters to Virginia about starlight reflecting off the Owen Stanley Mountains and about the coconut cream pies baked by the squadron mess sergeant. Privately, he fought fatigue. Quinine tablets left a metallic taste, and each funeral for a downed pilot etched another shadow behind his eyes. Yet he kept flying, often leading missions despite orders that senior officers should remain at command posts. He believed leadership required visibility in the thickest danger. His men reciprocated with fierce loyalty, adopting his clipped Texas drawl when calling out bandits over the radio. October 11, 1943, produced the sortie that would etch his name into wartime lore. Reconnaissance reported a sizable enemy force, more than 40 bombers and fighters, heading toward Allied positions. At Wewak, Kearby scrambled 3 P-47s, outnumbered nearly 10-1. At 25,000 feet, he spotted the formation. Twin-engine Nakajima Ki-49s in box formation with fighter escorts stacked above. He ordered a shallow descent, open throttle, and slashed through the bomber scythe, cutting down one, then yanking skyward, into a climbing spiral that forced escorting fighters into disarray. He descended again, fired at another bomber until flames billowed from its starboard wing, then rolled inverted to chase a fleeing Ki-43. The fight scattered across layers of cloud. In 30 minutes he claimed 6 confirmed victories, the highest single mission score by a 5th Air Force pilot to that date. He landed nearly out of ammunition, canopy splattered with oil, radiator flashing caution lights. Maintenance crews counted bullet holes in his wings, while the operations officer teletyped the after-action report that would eventually reach Washington. 3 months later, Brigadier General George C. Kenney pinned the Medal of Honor on Kearby's flight jacket during a field ceremony, though Neel remained modest, crediting discipline, gunnery practice, and a good airplane. Medals did not grant respite. By late 1943, Allied momentum forced Japan into defensive contraction, and continuous sorties strained pilots and machines alike. Engines coughed from tropical humidity, propeller blades pitted in wind-driven volcanic ash. Kearby lobbied stateside logistics for additional high-octane fuel and improved drop tanks, so his Thunderbolts could escort bombers deeper toward Hollandia and Wewak. On Christmas Eve, he organized a rare dinner with white tablecloths and canned turkey, an attempt to lift morale among men who had not seen their families in over a year. He convened poker games, swapped baseball anecdotes, and listened to swing records that a supply sergeant had traded for cartons of cigarettes. Some nights, he walked alone to the edge of the airfield, gazing beyond the runway lanterns and wondering whether his young daughters in Texas would grow up remembering him, or merely the sepia portrait on their mantle. Through January 1944, his tally climbed steadily, 18, 19, 20 confirmed, yet each edition carried the burden of comrades lost. Second Lieutenant Samuel Blair spun into the Bismarck Sea when a wing route failed. Captain Sammy Sims never returned from a weather recon due to dense cloud. Others succumbed to fevers or accidental ground fires. Neel attended every burial possible, standing ramrod straight as chaplains recited prayers above the freshly turned earth. He wrote condolence letters by hand, refusing a typist, believing families deserved a personal touch. Combat, he told Younger, pilots, was a necessary evil until peace could be brokered. The task was to finish the job quickly so fewer would suffer. On March 5, 1944, Kearby led a flight of 4 P-47s from Sidor to intercept reported enemy shipping near Wewak. Low haze blurred the horizon, complicating navigation. En route, they encountered a small cluster of Oscars near the village of Dagwa. Diving from altitude, the Thunderbolt scattered the formation. Neel downed one fighter and pursued another that began a steep climb. Witnesses later said he overshot, exposing his belly just long enough for an enemy gunner to rake his fuselage. His P-47 trailed streamers of glycol, engine coughing. He radioed calmly that he was hit but controllable, then turned toward the coast in hopes of a forced beach landing. Moments later, fiery Ginger 4 rolled inverted and vanished into the jungle canopy. A column of smoke rose briefly, then the rainforest swallowed every trace. Search teams combed the area for days, battling leeches and heat, but found only shards of aluminum and a fragment of his pilot's map. News of his loss shook the 348th. Roosters crowed over silent breakfast. Tables. Mechanics polished wingtips in wordless vigil. At a memorial service near the runway threshold, pilots lined up their P-47s nose to tail, each engine idling at low RPM to honor the commander who had believed so fiercely in the aircraft's potential. March rain drummed on steel helmets as a bugler played taps. A month later, the War Department confirmed his death and awarded him 2 additional posthumous aerial victories based on gun camera film recovered from his wingman, bringing his official total to 22. He was 32 years old. Virginia. Kearby received the telegram while preparing her children for church. She read the War Department notice only once before folding it into her Bible next to the very psalm she had given Neel at Randolph Field 7 years earlier. Friends and neighbors organized casseroles and floral tributes, but she insisted on a simple service. Weeks afterward, when reporters asked how she wished her husband to be remembered, she replied, "As a man who did his duty and kept faith with those he led." Back in the Pacific, the 348th Fighter Group pushed onward, escorting bombers over Biak and later the Philippines, its P-47 tails now emblazoned with a red and white checkerboard. New pilots studied Kearby's annotated manuals, practicing the energy dive tactics he had pioneered. His example rippled outward. 5th Air Force doctrine codified high-altitude, high-speed slashing attacks for all Thunderbolt units, improving survivability and effectiveness. When jet fighters emerged in the post-war era, many of his protégés transitioned seamlessly, crediting their late commander's emphasis on disciplined gunnery and situational awareness. In the decades after victory, monuments sprouted across old airfields. A bronze plaque at Arlington National Cemetery bears his name among fellow aviators lost in action. In Texas, a portion of State Highway 79 was designated the Neel E. Kearby Memorial Highway, cutting through Mesquite Plains not far from his childhood home. At the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, visitors pause beside a polished P-47 displaying the familiar nose art, reading the inscription that recounts his Medal of Honor mission. School children trace the aircraft's rivets, while docents speak of courage tempered by responsibility, of innovation born from necessity, and of a leader who never asked subordinates to brave dangers he would not face himself. Yet perhaps his most enduring legacy resides not in hardware or highway signs, but in anecdotes passed through generations of fighter pilots. They speak of a commander who listened more than he lectured, who greeted every dawn patrol with the same steady voice over the radio, "Let's make it a good day, boys," and who viewed enemy pilots not as villains, but as adversaries equally, swept into war's machinery. His story illustrates the paradox of aerial combat, triumph measured by aircraft destroyed, and grief measured by friends who never returned. In that tension lies a cautionary truth that transcends era and nationality. Neel Kearby's life, brief yet luminous, reminds us that proficiency in war is most honorable when married to a yearning for peace. Long after the Pacific skies fell silent, veterans of the 348th gathered for reunions, trading tales under banners stitched with their checkerboard emblem. They recounted the sweltering nights in Tent City, the metallic taste of quinine, the howl of the Thunderbolt's turbo supercharger as it climbed into sunrise. At every reunion, someone would raise a toast. "To the boss," they said, glasses. Catching the hall light, silence followed, not mournful but grateful. A pause acknowledging the weight of roads traveled since those fragile days. In that silence lives the beating heart of Neel Kearby's legacy. The belief that leadership demands courage tethered to conscience, and that even in war's harsh calculus, humanity must never be surrendered. It is a lesson as vital now as when a young Texan first tightened the chin strap of his flight helmet, lifted Fiery Ginger 4 from a rain-slick runway, and pointed her toward a horizon where duty and destiny met. Virginia Kearby returned to the rhythms of civilian life, but the cadence of a family without its patriarch was forever altered. After the telegram, she moved with her daughters, Alice and Margaret, to Austin, seeking the quiet steadiness of her own parents' home. She finished a teaching certificate and took a position at a neighborhood grade school, the same one where Neel had once visited to read fairy tales aloud during furlough. Each spring, she organized an aviation-themed book fair, and on a small easel near the entrance, placed a black-and-white photograph of her late husband smiling beside Fiery Ginger 4. Children rarely connected the genial face in the picture with the word ace, yet the image sowed a soft curiosity. More than one youngster wandered into the library afterward, searching for books about fighter pilots and tropical skies. Neel's parents, meanwhile, kept his boyhood bedroom intact. Model airplanes still hung from the ceiling on fishing line, their propellers frozen mid-whirl. On birthdays, they laid a single yellow rose on the pillow and read aloud the Medal of Honor citation. In time, the ritual became less about grief and more about gratitude that their son's ideals, discipline, humility, camaraderie, had not perished with him. That same spirit animated the reunions of the 348th Fighter Group. In 1948, the former pilots met for the first time since demobilization, renting a small banquet room at the Driscoll Hotel in downtown Austin. They poured coffee into white china, emblazoned with gilded Ds, then swapped stories long into the night of night landings on half-lit steel planking, of engine backfires that sent gouts of flame past the canopy, of the moment they realized the jug could dive faster than fear itself. When conversation turned to Kearby, the room hushed without cue. Someone passed around the battered clipboard he had used to brief missions. The pages still bore penciled notes on ammunition loads and fuel burn. They voted unanimously to form a scholarship fund for aspiring Texas aviators, citing Neel's conviction that opportunity should never be hostage to circumstance. By the early 1950s, several of his protégés wore new uniforms of an infant U.S. Air Force and found themselves soaring over Korea in swept-wing F-86 Sabres. They approached jet combat with lessons distilled from their old commander. Keep the energy advantage, strike fast, disengage clean. Squadron lore credits Captain Jack Tex Davison. Once a rookie Kearby personally drilled on deflection, shooting, with saving an entire bomber box near the Yalu when he dove through Soviet-flown MiGs exactly as he had once slashed Ki-43s above New Guinea. In letters home, Davison confessed that every time he keyed his transmit switch, he could almost hear the calm Texas drawl. "Let's make it a good day, boys." While new wars raged, the jungle around Neel's crash site reclaimed its secrets. Lianas coiled over shattered aluminum ribs, and monsoon rains washed the last droplets of high-octane fuel into the soil. It seemed destiny that no witness would ever chart the exact coordinates until 1969, when a team of Australian surveyors, cutting a new trail toward Wewak, stumbled upon an oxidized Pratt & Whitney radial wedged between buttress roots. Plates bearing the Republic's serial number matched records for Fiery Ginger 4. Word reached the U.S. Embassy in Port Moresby. Within months, an Army recovery detachment helicoptered in, clearing vines with machetes. They found fragments of flight jacket canvas, a single brass .50 caliber casing, and the corroded outline of a pilot's wings. Human remains were scant. Tropical soil is relentless. But meticulous work yielded 2 teeth, and a service-issue wristwatch stopped at 1427. Forensics confirmed identity through dental records forwarded by Virginia, who had kept them tucked behind family photographs for 25 years. That autumn, a flag-draped casket arrived at Andrews Air Force Base. Virginia, Alice, and Margaret stood on the tarmac, in coats too light for the Maryland breeze, hands entwined. The casket was reinterred at Arlington during a modest service, attended by fellow Thunderbolt veterans and a flight of F-4 Phantoms roaring overhead in missing man formation. As taps sounded, Virginia lifted her gaze beyond the marble rows and whispered, "He finally came home, girls." Later, while touring the Air Force Museum, she donated the recovered wings, the flight jacket fragment, and Neel's handwritten mission notebook. Curators created a new exhibit entitled Innovation in the Pacific, anchoring the display with a restored P-47 painted in the same olive drab and grey as Fiery Ginger 4, the name stenciled beneath the cockpit rail in looping script. Through the 1970s, the scholarship fund flourished, buoyed by donations from aerospace companies that traced corporate lineages back to Republic Aviation. One beneficiary, Maria Santos, a first-generation Mexican-American from El Paso, graduated top of her ROTC class and became among the first women to fly the A-10 Thunderbolt II. During an interview, she cited Kearby's story as proof that performance, not preconception, defined a combat aircraft's worth. "He took a plane people said couldn't win in the Pacific," she told reporters, "and rewrote the playbook. That mindset still matters." On the tail of her jet, just below the serial, she painted a tiny red and white checkerboard. In 1984, Congress posthumously promoted Kearby to full colonel, recognizing his tactical contributions to fighter doctrine. The ceremony in the House Armed Services Committee chamber was brief, almost perfunctory, but the citation entered into the congressional record ensured future historians would encounter his name in the same paragraphs as contemporaries like Bong and Maguire. Academic interest blossomed. Graduate students sifted through mission reports now declassified, mapping every sortie of the 348th. Researchers noted how Kearby's emphasis on high-speed slashing tactics anticipated principles later embedded in energy maneuverability charts used for jet fighters. In a thesis published at the Air University, Captain Harold O'Hara concluded, Colonel Kearby's intuitive grasp of energy management offset enemy numerical superiority, proving that pilot cognition could compensate for mechanical disparity. This insight remains foundational to modern air combat instruction. Virginia did not attend the congressional ceremony. She had suffered a minor stroke that left her equilibrium fragile. Yet she continued to write short letters to new scholarship winners, signing each with a flowing V. On her bedroom dresser sat the folded flag from Arlington, a sepia wedding portrait, and a recent color photo of Alice's youngest child wearing a paper pilot's cap. When Virginia passed away in 1990, her daughters found among her papers Neel's last, unfinished letter, dated March 3, 1944. It described sunrises over Sidor and asked her to send more photographs of the girls. The ink faded toward the end, the final sentence broken mid-phrase, as though he had set down the pen, intending to finish after the flight that never returned. The family donated that letter to the museum, where docents now display it beside. A gently ticking metronome, symbolizing the abruptly halted cadence of countless wartime lives. Into the 21st century, the legend found new mediums. Documentary filmmakers used digital restorations of gun camera footage to illustrate his October 11th rampage, a sequence that, stripped of narration, feels less like triumph than a stark reminder of war's brevity. Flight simulation enthusiasts coded Fiery Ginger 4 into online multiplayer arenas, where gamers exchange salutes before mimicking his steep diving attacks. In forums, they debate whether the Jug's 8 guns truly converged at 300 yards, or if Kearby set a custom harmonization for short-range bursts. Such minutiae keep the dialogue alive, bridging generations that may never meet on a real runway. On the 75th anniversary of his Medal of Honor mission, grandchildren and great-grandchildren gathered under the wings of that museum, P-47. They traced the rivet lines, ran fingers across the nose art's careful curves, and listened to veterans now well into their 90s recall a young colonel's measured tone, crackling over primitive VHF sets. One frail former crew chief described sanding gun barrel burrs with emery cloth because Kearby believed jams were inexcusable. Another remembered sliding a cold Coca-Cola into the cockpit before takeoff, a luxury salvaged from an Australian supply ship. The vets spoke slowly, but their eyes brightened as the hangar's overhead lights sparkled off polished aluminum, catching reflections of past and present in the same pane. That evening, Alice and Margaret stood alone after visitors left, the museum luminous in hush. They touched the cowling, where their mother once brushed her fingertips, and thought about the diverging fates hinged on a single burst of enemy fire above New Guinea. Without that moment, who might their father have become? A test pilot for early jets? A mentor in the dawning space age? The questions were unanswerable. Yet the silhouette before them provided something better, a tangible testament that a life interrupted can still project influence far beyond its chronological bounds. When the security guard approached to lock up, the sisters lingered a moment longer, listening for echoes of an R2800 engine that no longer reverberated anywhere except in memory. Outside, dusk settled over Dayton. Airliners arced westward, strobing lights slicing violet sky, metal airs to wooden model airplanes once suspended by fishing line in a Texas bedroom. Somewhere inside those pressurized cabins, a child might be gazing out the window, dreaming of propellers and cloud castles. Perhaps, decades hence, that child will wander into a museum, pause before a rugged fighter named Fiery Ginger 4, and read about a pilot who believed an aircraft's supposed limits were merely an invitation to think harder, train better, and act with courage tempered by care. In that future gaze, the legacy of Colonel Neel E. Kearby will live anew, reminding yet another generation that the highest form of mastery in the art of war is the refusal to let war define the total measure of a man.